Every government promises its money will hold value forever. Every central bank swears its currency is backed by strength and stability. Every economist insists that modern monetary policy has solved the ancient problem of runaway inflation. And every time hyperinflation strikes, these promises crumble like paper in fire. From Hungary's pengo to Zimbabwe's dollar, from Venezuela's bolivar to the currencies that died before most people could even pronounce their names, the pattern repeats with terrifying precision. Nations don't just lose their money during hyperinflation, they lose their identity, their future, and their soul. The word hyperinflation sounds clinical, academic, like something that belongs in dusty economics textbooks rather than the headlines of tomorrow's news. But hyperinflation isn't theory. It's devastation in real time. It's watching a lifetime of savings evaporate in weeks. It's carrying wheelbarrows full of cash to buy a loaf of bread. Its entire economies collapsing so fast that governments can't print money quickly enough to keep pace with their own destruction. Most people think hyperinflation is rare, something that only happens to failed states or war-torn nations in distant corners of the world. They assume their currency, their government, their system is different. But history has a brutal lesson that every citizen should understand. Hyperinflation doesn't discriminate. It has destroyed the currencies of empires and democracies, communist regimes and capitalist powerhouses, developed nations and emerging markets. The only question isn't whether it can happen. The question is what triggers it, how fast it spreads, and who survives when the financial system burns to ash. Here's what makes hyperinflation so terrifying. It doesn't announce itself with sirens or warnings. It creeps in disguised as normal inflation, the kind that central bankers dismiss as temporary or manageable. Prices rise a little faster than usual. Government spending increases to cover emergency costs. Money supply expands to stimulate growth. Politicians reassure citizens that everything is under control. And then, almost overnight, the mechanism breaks. What was manageable becomes unstoppable. What was temporary becomes permanent. What was controlled becomes chaos. The technical definition of hyperinflation is deceptively simple: monthly inflation rates exceeding 50%. But behind that number lies a world where economic laws collapse and human behavior becomes desperate. When prices double every few weeks, or in extreme cases every few days, money stops being a store of value and becomes a race against time. Workers demand to be paid daily instead of monthly because their salaries lose purchasing power faster than they can spend them. Businesses stop accepting their own country's currency, preferring barter or foreign money. Governments print larger and larger denominations of banknotes, creating bills worth trillions or quadrillions that can barely buy basic necessities. But hyperinflation isn't just about numbers on banknotes or economic statistics. It's about the complete breakdown of the social contract between governments and citizens. When a currency dies, trust dies with it. People who followed the rules, saved their money, and trusted their institutions discover that their government has essentially robbed them through monetary debasement. The elderly, living on fixed pensions, watch their retirement funds become worthless. Workers find that their wages can't cover rent, food, or medicine. Small businesses collapse because they can't price their goods fast enough to keep up with rising costs. The psychological impact cuts deeper than the economic damage. Hyperinflation destroys the belief that tomorrow will be better than today. It shatters the assumption that hard work and saving will build a secure future. When money becomes meaningless, society itself begins to unravel. Crime rises as desperate people resort to theft or black market trading. Social services collapse as governments lose the ability to fund basic programs. Brain drain accelerates as educated citizens flee to countries with stable currencies. What's most disturbing about hyperinflation is how quickly it can transform a functioning economy into a disaster zone. Countries that seemed stable and prosperous can spiral into monetary chaos in months or even weeks. The triggers are often predictable: excessive government spending, loss of confidence in leadership, external shocks like war or sanctions, or simply the perception that a currency is weakening. Once the process begins, it feeds on itself. Fear of inflation causes people to spend money as quickly as possible, which drives up demand and prices. Rising prices erode confidence in the currency, which makes people even more desperate to convert their money into goods or foreign currency. Each cycle accelerates the next until the entire system collapses under its own momentum. Modern technology hasn't eliminated the threat of hyperinflation. If anything, it has made the process faster and more devastating. Digital transactions mean that capital can flee a currency at the speed of light. Social media spreads panic and misinformation faster than governments can respond. Global financial markets can amplify local problems into international crises. A currency crisis that once might have taken years to unfold can now destroy an economy in weeks. The most chilling aspect of studying hyperinflation is realizing how many warning signs exist in today's global economy. Record levels of government debt, unprecedented money printing, rising geopolitical tensions, and declining trust in institutions create conditions that history shows us can spiral out of control. The question isn't whether hyperinflation will strike again. The question is where, when, and how devastating it will be. The architects of hyperinflation are never the people who suffer from it. They're the politicians who promise easy solutions to complex problems, the central bankers who believe they can engineer prosperity through monetary manipulation, and the governments that choose short-term political survival over long-term economic stability. These decision-makers rarely pay the price for their choices. When currencies collapse, they have offshore accounts, foreign assets, and escape plans. It's the ordinary citizens who wake up to find their life savings transformed into decorative paper. Hungary in 1946 offers the most extreme example of monetary destruction in recorded history. The country emerged from World War II economically shattered, with nearly half its infrastructure destroyed and massive reparation payments demanded by the Soviet Union. The Hungarian government faced an impossible choice: raise taxes to crushing levels or print money to cover expenses. They chose the printing press, and the result was an inflationary nightmare that defied comprehension. At the peak of Hungarian hyperinflation, prices doubled every 15 hours. The currency, called the pengo, became so worthless that the government issued banknotes denominated in billions, trillions, and eventually quintillions. A loaf of bread that cost 6 pengo in 1945 required 6 billion pengo just 1 year later. Workers were paid twice a day because their morning wages couldn't buy lunch by the afternoon. The monthly inflation rate reached 13.6 quadrillion %, a number so large it loses all meaning to human comprehension. But even these astronomical figures don't capture the human cost. Families watch their savings evaporate in real time. Farmers refuse to sell crops for worthless currency, leading to food shortages in cities. Barter systems replaced monetary transactions as people traded cigarettes, soap, or anything with tangible value. The social fabric began to tear as trust in institutions, contracts, and the basic mechanisms of commerce disappeared. Zimbabwe's experience in the early 2000s proves that hyperinflation isn't confined to post-war reconstruction periods. Under Robert Mugabe's leadership, the country pursued disastrous land redistribution policies that destroyed agricultural productivity and triggered massive capital flight. As the economy contracted, the government responded by printing more money to fund its operations and maintain political support through subsidies and public sector employment. The result was a monetary catastrophe that made international headlines for its sheer absurdity. By 2008, Zimbabwe's inflation rate exceeded 200 million % annually. Banknotes were issued in denominations of 100 trillion Zimbabwe dollars. Citizens carried cash in shopping bags and wheelbarrows. A single loaf of bread cost more than what 12 cars had cost a decade earlier. The currency became so worthless that people used it as toilet paper or wallpaper because it was cheaper than actual paper products. Zimbabwe's hyperinflation revealed how quickly modern economies can disintegrate when monetary policy loses all restraint. The country had been relatively prosperous at independence, with a diversified economy and educated population. Within 3 decades, poor governance and monetary mismanagement had reduced it to economic ruin. Millions of Zimbabweans fled to neighbouring countries, creating one of Africa's largest refugee crises. Those who remained faced malnutrition, disease, and the complete breakdown of public services. Venezuela represents the most recent and perhaps most tragic example of hyperinflation's destructive power. The country possessed every advantage an economy could want: vast oil reserves, educated population, fertile agricultural land, and strategic geographic location. Yet a combination of corruption, price controls, currency manipulation, and fiscal irresponsibility triggered an inflationary spiral that has lasted nearly a decade. Venezuelan hyperinflation began gradually, with inflation rates rising from manageable levels in the early 2000s to over 1,000,000% by 2018. The government of Nicolás Maduro initially denied the crisis, suppressing official inflation statistics and blaming external enemies for economic problems. But reality couldn't be hidden as grocery shelves emptied, medicine became unavailable, and basic services collapsed. The human toll has been staggering. Over 6 million Venezuelans have fled their homeland, creating the largest refugee crisis in the Western Hemisphere's modern history. Those who remain face malnutrition rates comparable to war zones. Hospitals lack basic supplies, schools close because teachers can't afford to travel to work. The country that once boasted the highest standard of living in South America now struggles with poverty rates exceeding 90%. What makes Venezuela's crisis particularly instructive is how a resource-rich nation with democratic institutions could fall into such economic despair. The answer lies in the fundamental misunderstanding of how wealth is created and preserved. Oil revenues created an illusion of prosperity that masked underlying economic weaknesses. When oil prices fell and production declined due to mismanagement, the government tried to maintain living standards through monetary expansion and price controls. These policies created shortages, black markets, and ultimately the complete breakdown of the pricing system. The pattern across all hyperinflationary episodes remains consistent. Governments face fiscal crises they can't or won't solve through taxation or spending cuts. They turn to the printing press as a seemingly painless solution. Initially, the extra money stimulates economic activity and provides temporary relief. But as people recognize what's happening, they begin converting currency into real assets, foreign money, or goods. This behavior accelerates price increases and forces governments to print even more money to maintain the same level of real spending. The truth about hyperinflation isn't hidden in complex economic theories or classified government documents. It's written in the ashes of every currency that died before it, in the stories of families who lost everything they built, in the exodus of millions who fled their homelands with nothing but the clothes on their backs. Every hyperinflation tells the same story. Governments that choose deception over discipline, citizens who trust institutions that cannot be trusted, and the brutal mathematics of monetary collapse that respects no borders, no promises, and no prayers. The warning signs are everywhere if you know where to look. Record debt levels that can never be repaid, central banks creating money at unprecedented scales, political leaders promising solutions that defy economic reality, citizens who believe their currency, their system, their nation is somehow different from all the others that came before. But hyperinflation doesn't care about exceptionalism. It only cares about the laws of supply, demand, and human psychology that no government can suspend forever. History doesn't repeat, but if you ignore its lessons, it will crush you all the same. The next hyperinflation is already forming somewhere in the world, waiting for the right combination of fiscal recklessness, political crisis, and public desperation to unleash itself. The only question is whether you'll recognize it before it's too late, or whether you'll join the ranks of those who trusted their government's promises right up until the day their money became worthless paper. If this opened your eyes to something you hadn't considered before, hit subscribe. History has the answers. I'll show you where to look.